In Portugal's legislative election on March 10th, a centre-right coalition won narrowly, but without a majority. The Democratic Alliance got 29.5%, just ahead of the Socialist Party's 28.7%. Notably, the party Chega, which stands for a stricter migration policy, secured 18% of the vote, marking a significant breakthrough. Can you tell us more about this 2024 Portuguese legislative election that took place on March 10th, Sunday?
Sure, Rebecca. So the current election was an early election. It was normally the calendar for the elections would have been not 24 but 26, because the last election we had was in 2022. However, the government who's been running the country since 22 has been a Socialist Party government. They had an absolute majority. So everyone expected that since this would be a more stable time for Portugal. That didn't turn out to be the case. In spite of their absolute majority, they had a string of scandals, and that culminated in a corruption scandal that reached the office of the Prime Minister himself, António Costa. So at a certain point, he had to resign. There is speculation in Portugal that he didn't expect the president of the country to accept his resignation, but perhaps to his surprise or not, he did. And so we had early elections. This was a particularly auspicious time for right-wing parties like Chega, because Chega had always had a very strong anti-corruption platform. And so this is how we come to the results that we now had in 24. Perhaps you want to ask more questions about that specifically.
What do you think about this recent change to what's been described as more conservative ideas in Portuguese politics shown in this election? What do you think it will mean for Portuguese politics?
There are some doubts on how ideological this change is, because a great portion of the vote that Chega got, and mind you, the only major news in this election is Chega. The other parties are either left-wing or they didn't particularly grow. However, a substantial share of the vote that Chega obtained came from, in fact, the Socialist Party. So how ideological the vote is anyone's guess. Many people will claim this is just a protest vote. That being said, just the fact that you have a conservative party doing well in Portugal is big news, because this regime, in case your viewers don't know, was founded through a revolution in 1974, and that revolution was very Marxist in its ideals. So ever since the 70s, that the regime has been a socialist regime. And people have identified, for the most part, with left-wing views and left-wing ideals. So just the simple fact that you have a conservative party doing well is big news for Portugal. Now, will this lead to actual policy changes is yet to be determined, because there is no certainty that what in Portugal we would call center-right, or even though they're called social democrats, but there are high doubts that they will be willing to govern with Chega, or if they do, that they will be willing to implement conservative policies.
A lot of the headlines describe the Portuguese voters now as anti-establishment, or to have anti-establishment sentiments. Do you agree with this statement?
Yes, and again, this is part of the reason why Chega did so well, because they had been talking about corruption for a long time, and lo and behold, the government collapses through a corruption scandal. So many people are dissatisfied with the Socialist Party, but they also don't see a viable alternative in the opposition Social Democrats. So the Social Democrats practically tied with the Socialists. They have a relatively have small number of more MPs than the Socialist Party, but it's not but at least statistically, on a percentage, it's almost irrelevant. So they will need Chega to form government, but they seem to be unwilling to do so.
Chega have also been accused in a lot of headlines as being a far-right party. What do you think about this labeling?
Well, most of the people who went to found Chega, me included, came from the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats. So it makes little sense that we would be accused of being far right when you know already that those parties are not far right in the slightest. On top of it, again, the reason why that happens is because Portugal is a socialist regime. It is a socialist system. So any party that leaves that frame of socialism or a leftist matrix, let's put it that way, will inevitably be accused of being far right. But it's very interesting because the main opposition party, the Social Democrats, by the name, you know, they are center or center left. So for the media, their view is, well, you can basically be a center-left party or anything else and you will be far right. Now, what exactly is far right about Chega, no one can actually say. We have restricted views on immigration, yes, but beyond that, you know, it's rhetoric, I would say.
It seemed in this election for the voters, migration, housing crises were some of the most urgent questions for the voters. What could this power shift mean when it comes to improvements regarding those questions?
Again, it all depends on whether the Social Democrats will be willing to make a deal with Chega. Yet I would argue that the main issue for Chega and for right-wing voters was actually corruption. Immigration is an issue, but I would argue it's an issue mostly in the Lisbon area, Lisbon metropolitan area. It's not so much of a problem in the rest of the country. And you also have to take into consideration that our problems with immigration are slightly different than Sweden's, because in Sweden, the immigration that you had, again, in the 90s with the Balkan refugees, and then later on with Middle Eastern people in general, that's not the immigration that we have in Portugal. The immigration that we have in Portugal are mostly people from the former colonies and Brazil. So basically, these people do speak Portuguese, and they are Christians for the most part. It's just that they're very badly integrated. And because of socialist housing policies, they've been put into social housing, which has steadily become ghettos. And that means that the youths of these neighborhoods also become violent. And these are some of the reasons why we have problems with immigration, but not quite as severe as Sweden, and not as culturally incompatible as Sweden.
Chega's campaign posters, what are they trying to say? I'm afraid to try to pronounce it myself, but it's something along the lines of Precisa de uma limpeza. Perhaps I didn't read that right. Feel happy to read it the correct way. What is it trying to say?
The message is Portugal needs cleaning. Let's clean Portugal. And by cleaning, what they mean is they're talking specifically about corruption. And this is because the only party, the only main, the only parliament represented party that even speaks of corruption or makes an emphasis on corruption is Chega. The other parties do not see that as a big priority. And again, I reiterate, because the government collapsed due to a corruption scandal, that gave Chega big points and basically proved Chega's point that the country needs big reforms, starting with corruption.
And protests were organized by Chega as well. What motivated these protests, and what impact do you believe that they had on the election?
There weren't any major demonstrations organized by Chega recently, but in the past, they have mostly focused on, well, there was a big one during the pandemic. There were different ones focusing on corruption. There was a big one, I would say a quite successful one, when President Lula of Brazil visited. And that was a very controversial visit because he was invited by the Socialist Party to be present during the celebrations of the Revolution Day. And usually those celebrations, they do take place, but they are a national event. You don't have really foreign dignitaries other than the ambassadors. But they invited Lula to be present, which for Chega, which is, again, has a very strong anti-corruption platform, it was egregious. Because, as you know, Lula da Silva was arrested and he was in prison on corruption charges. So it was inconceivable that someone like that would be invited to be present during the Revolution Day celebrations. But again, the protests, for the most part, are not really focusing on immigration issues. They are more rather focused on corruption issues.
And the rise of the Chega party, could it lead to a greater collaboration among the right-wing parties in Portugal? And how do you think that these collaborations would affect the country?
It's difficult at this point. First of all, I would say there are no other right-wing parties other than Chega, really. The other two that in Portugal people consider to be on the right are the Social Democrats, which is the main opposition party and the party that won the elections, and the Liberal Initiative. Now, the Liberal Initiative is an ALDE family party, so they are very focused on economic issues, and they strive for more privatizations and more private sector business-friendly measures. But on the other hand, they also have a very strong, how can I put it, very strong socially liberal platform. In other words, they're very pro-LGBT issues in almost American way. So they themselves actually have argued that they would have much preferred to be at the center in the parliament, not on the right. So it's questionable how right-wing they are. But at this point, a coalition between them and the Social Democrats would be seen as possible, as even likely. Chega, however, is the problem because no one wants to enter into a coalition with Chega. But at the same time, the leader of Chega, Ventura, has made it clear that either Chega is a part of a coalition or there will be no government deal.
And to add on one final question, the recent elections are said to be bad news for the Europe's Social Democrats. Meanwhile, the Chega, so-called far right, suggests that similar groups may gain ground in the upcoming European Parliament election in June. Do you agree with this?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is, again, big news because until now, there were no conservative parties in Portugal, and so much so that the further right that you could go in terms of European Parliament families was the EPP. So the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats were both members of EPP, but there was no one from ECR, no one from ID, no one from the former, you would remember there used to be another party family that Nigel Farage was a member of. So no parties in Portugal were a member of those. And now you have Chega, and Chega stands to elect between 3 and 5 MEPs. So that's a pretty big parliamentary group for a new party, and they will go directly into ID because that's the family that Chega is a member of.
Thank you again, Miguel Nunes Silva, Director of Trezeno Institute and local councilman for the Chega party.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching Riks Europe.